Now, while my general response to people asking me what my favourite day is to say that there were so many great ones it's hard to choose, this might actually be it. And this is going from North Uist across to Harris and then onto the edges of Lewis. I'm setting out here from Carinish on what was another day of high winds, but the winds were coming from the south, i.e. from behind me, and so were blowing me along at quite a pace. It's been most spectacular when I turned off the A65 main road at Claddock and took the road that goes up over the bog. And it's a climb, but I was doing an average of 32 kilometres an hour going up this road because the wind was blowing so strongly behind me. Nice day. Big storm coming in again tomorrow. Not quite sure I'm going to get to stay tonight. I'd like to be somewhere a bit sheltered. I definitely don't want to be in this sort of landscape because it looks like there'll be rain all day. So yeah, I mean, I looked up B&Bs and hotels, but there's nothing on my route at all. In fact, available within a reasonable range. Because if there was, I would probably book 2 nights. I'd just stay in, ideally a town where I could go out to the pub or whatever else. But anyway, we'll see what I end up. I recorded that near the top, and you can certainly tell there's a strong wind blowing as we look down towards the coast again at Malacleit, where I rejoined the route and then was coming along through what was increasingly spectacular scenery, it has to be said, on the road that would take me to the small island of Berneray, and that there's a causeway that crosses that, which is where I was going to be catching the ferry. There's also a brief stop here for supplies, and I was passing cyclists on this route heading the other way, but they're heading into the wind, and oh boy, they were seriously struggling in some cases. For me though, this was great. Increasingly spectacular scenery, perhaps giving a hint of what it was going to be like on the other side of the crossing once I reached that in the afternoon. This was also, though, where the rain clouds started to return. Weather can change brutally quickly. This came down on me in about 15 seconds. I just had enough time to pull the jacket off. Bloody hell. But then an unexpected treat in the form of Dúnadh Dúchar, which is an Iron Age crannoig site that's very well preserved in terms of the layout of the islands and the causeways, and is a bit Game of Thrones-y for those of you who've read the books or watched, I think it's the first season. And then finally the causeway that's going to take me to the ferry, and the ferry is then going to take me across the Sound of Harris to Harris itself. Getting some nice last sunshine for this bit. I also had about an hour of wait for the ferry, so that was an opportunity to do a bit of quick battery charging, which was going to be useful, seeing as I didn't know where I was staying that night. And then bikes back on the ferry yet again, and some views from the ferry as we depart and then arrive. The ferry arrives in Leverburgh, and there's 2 routes out of that, a western one which goes by the beaches, or an eastern one which goes by the hills. Hard to choose between the 2 according to other people who've done the route, but I ended up opting for the hills, and I must say I don't regret that a bit. Completely spectacular cycling on this route along narrow, very, very windy and spectacular roads. Given that the people I met said that they'd be hard pushed to make a choice of one over the other, I can only presume that the beach route is equally spectacular, but presumably in quite a different way. Part of my reason for choosing the western route was that I had no plan where I was going to stay that night. I knew there was a storm coming in, and I felt that the beaches, although it had been my initial plan to wild camp on those, would be a little bit too wild and exposed, and I was better trying to make as much progress as possible and looking to camp in the mountains as we crossed over into Lewis, and preferably in a forest. I had the idea that I'd try and find a site that would have something fairly solid south of me to protect me from the winds that would be coming in from the south. My other reason to try and make speed here was that the last town, in fact really the only one I was going to see, Tarbet, was going to be quite late in the day. I would get there around 6 o'clock, and I'd checked and it seemed that everything was going to be shutting up around 6. I didn't really have much in the way of food. I was also hoping to pick up some drink, so I needed to get there before everything closed up. That was grand. The descent into Tarbet's coming up in a moment here. I managed to get to the shop with 5 minutes to spare and got a couple of tins of ginger flavoured gin and tonic, if I remember correctly, much to the amusement of the teenager running the counter. Bit of this road is really spectacular. Here we're about to begin the descent into Tarbet itself, which is quite thrilling along with the rest of it. So once you come through Tarbet, you're then heading along the coast for a while, and then some mountains loom up in the distance, and I'm watching the road and I'm going, oh my god, it's heading straight for the mountains. So yep, it's another one of those heading for the mountains. I knew there were mountains coming up, and I'd met cyclists who had abandoned going to Harris because they didn't want to deal with it. They're steep enough, but again, e-bikes take some of the pain out of the hills, so make it possible. Obviously there was a certain amount of battery husbandry going on here, so I wasn't able to use it massively, but yeah, it was grand. And certainly the fact that it was an absolutely beautiful evening, we're looking at about 7 o'clock here, I'd say maybe 8 o'clock in the evening, helped, because again, absolutely spectacular scenery. Scotland really pays off scenery wise on so many different occasions. In terms of a sheltered camping spot, I had spotted that there was a community forest coming up on my route, and that in the community forest there actually appeared to be a cabin that would provide pretty good shelter, I reckoned, if I camped right to the south of it. This was the road I also had my scariest experience of the trip. I suddenly found myself on loose gravel, and if you've ever had that experience on a bike and it's very loose gravel, I just slid across to the opposite side of the road here and just managed to get control back in time. But I survived to tell the tale, and soon enough the forest came up alongside the road. It took me a while to locate the spot where the cabin was, but I found it. Turned out to be perfect. There was even a picnic table, had my gin and tonics, had my food, which I think was a couple of those pies and pastry, and settled down for the night and the end of what was really one of the most beautiful days.